Hello, my name is Kristopher Zgorski, and welcome to another episode of We Are What We Read. This is the 10th episode in our monthly series. We have two more to finish up the year that we have committed to. I hope that you have all enjoyed watching the previous episodes. Once again, I'm joined by my co-host, Shawn Reilly Simmons. Shawn, we've had some great guests on, haven't we?
We have, and it just keeps getting better and better. Every episode, it's so fun. Different recordings, different recommendations. Yeah, loving it. I think you can tell by my hair growing out over the 10 months. It's getting
It,
better.
it'll be like a timeline of Shawn, so that'll be very good. I think all of us actually, so that'll be really great. So we have a great lineup of guests with us this evening. It's an all-female lineup for the first time in the series, so that's kind of exciting. And I just know I've seen the lists of what they're recommending, and I know there's some great books coming up. So let's get right into it. We're going to start our evening this evening with Valerie V.M. Burns. Valerie V.M. Burns is an Agatha, Anthony, Edgar, and New Generation Award finalist. She is the author of The Mystery Bookshop, Dog Club, R.J. Franklin, and Baker Street Mystery Series. Writing as Callie E. Benjamin, Valerie also writes the Bailey the Bloodhound Mystery Series. She is also a mentor in the Writing Popular Fiction MFA program at Seton Hill University in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. Valerie lives in North Georgia with her two poodles, and we're so happy to welcome you here tonight, Valerie.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you. And thank you, Chris and Shawn, for having me. So, the book that I picked is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. If you know me, you know that I am a huge Agatha Christie fan. I think I have fallen in love with her, and I blame her for my addiction to mysteries. When I grew up about 3 blocks from my neighborhood library, and I used to go probably 2, 3 times a week. The first Agatha Christie book that I read was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and it blew my mind. And so I immediately went looking for another. So, And Then There Were None was actually the second of her books that I read. And I was very naive because I got this book and she puts 10 people on an island and starts killing them off. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be easy. Whoever is the last person is obviously the murderer. Well, I did not know Agatha Christie. She kills them all. This is not a spoiler. She tells you in the title, And Then There Were None. She kills them all. The only way you find out who done it is by reading the last chapter and the epilogue. So she is the queen of crime fiction. And from that moment forward, I was addicted to her and to mysteries. So I highly recommend this book. I blame her for my addiction to mysteries. And I also attribute her for being the reason that I write crime fiction to this day. So if you're interested in a mind boggling puzzle, pick up And Then There Were None. And even though you may know who done it, I read this book over and over and I find new things that I didn't see before because I'm not reading it to figure out who done it as a writer now. I'm reading it to find out how she put the clues in there. Where did she put the clues? And every time I find something new. So I highly recommend And Then There Were None.
That's a great recommendation. I'm so glad you brought this tonight. I've been listening to them again in the mornings when I do my walks. I'm like revisiting the Agatha Christie books, and I'm so glad I haven't done that one yet this year, but I'm going to think of you on my walks. So thank you so much for bringing that to us today, Valerie. Our next guest is Annette Dashofy. She is the USA Today best-selling author of the Agatha-nominated, here we are again, Agatha, Zoe Chambers Mysteries, the Detective Honeywell Mysteries, and the Dr. Tony Ryan Book Award-winning Death by Equine. She's also very humble. She has a very short bio. That is it. Welcome, Annette.
Thanks, Shawn. Uh, I'm going. I'm going to sound a lot like Valerie whenever I gush about Mary Higgins Clark, which it's not showing up very well there, but it's Where Are the Children? This book came out in 1975, and I read it fairly early on. It might have been out a year because I read it in paperback, but it was a new book at the time. And as a reader, I was reading all over the place. I read lots of genres, commercial fiction, older books, a lot of different thrillers of the day. And this one was different. This one struck me as different because the thrillers that I had been reading were like big explosions, and the books that went on to become blockbuster movies of the week, or that there were explosions, or there was an epidemic, or there was, everything was big. And this book was personal. It's about a young mother who was wrongly convicted of killing her two young children. And fast forward to the current day, she's remarried, she's starting a new life with a new name, and she has, again, two children. And she goes out into the backyard one day to where they were playing to get them to come in, and they're gone. And the only thing that's left is a mitten hanging on the swing. And it's like her worst nightmare. And it's every mother's worst nightmare. I mean, it's something that could happen in your own backyard. And that just seems so different for me as a reader. And also as a writer. I was a teenager at the time, but I was already writing books, longhand, in pencil, and spiral bound notebooks. But I was writing things like science fiction and Westerns. And after reading this book, I got so hooked on crime fiction that I started writing, mysteries and crime fiction and suspense back then. Nothing ever worth getting published, but I was hooked on it, and I've been hooked on it ever since. So Mary Higgins Clark very much is responsible for me writing mysteries and crime fiction. And I did get a chance to tell her that. I got to meet her at BoucherCon in Cleveland, and we rode in the elevator together. I got on the elevator, and there she is with her escort, and I got to shake her hand and tell her thank you, because she's responsible for starting me down the path of being a mystery writer.
I completely agree, Annette. And Mary Higgins Clark was also my gateway into crime after Encyclopedia Brown. But I mean, my first adult novel. And you are right. It was the time I read it. It was the first time I actually thought, well, this could happen to my mother, and she could be accused of this crime. So it really did bring it personal to the reader. There were domestic suspense books before then, but I think Mary Higgins Clark brought it to the masses. So thanks so much for bringing that to us tonight. Our next guest is Clair Lamb. Clair is a writer, editor, and researcher whose mystery fandom began when her grandfather gave her the clue in the crossword cipher Nancy Drew number 44 when she was 7. She was a bookseller and wrote newsletters for the much-missed mystery bookstore in Los Angeles, and since the early 2000s has been working with a wide range of authors, including John Connolly, Joseph Finder, Lisa Lutz, and Daniel Palmer, in areas ranging from social media to line editing. She has published 2 short stories of her own, but she prefers to read other people's work. Welcome, Clair.
Thanks. I have today something that might not be thought of as a crime novel, but in fact is, and in fact it's 3 crime novels. The Deptford trilogy by Robertson Davies, and particularly the first book, Fifth Business. It was published in 1970, so we were going back a ways now. Fifth Business starts with one crime, it ends with another, and understanding who is responsible for those crimes is the point of the whole trilogy. The first crime is a child's nasty assault. The second crime is the mysterious death of a millionaire, and in between is the whole world. And the book's themes are justice in this world and the next, the recurrence of patterns, the power of coincidence, and of things and of how things happen to us that are not necessarily about us. I was 23 or 24 when I discovered these books, and it's not an exaggeration to say that they were actually prescribed to me. I was a few years out of college. I was kind of lost. I was at that age where the script that had been written for my life had petered out. I had recently broken an engagement. I was on a career track that I'd just kind of fallen into. And the therapist I went to, and I recommend that everybody at that point in their lives go see a therapist, she said, go read Fifth Business. Fifth Business is the story of a man who discovers that while everybody is the character in their own life story, it doesn't mean that they are the protagonist of any larger story. In fact, it's just as interesting, it's just as satisfying to be the person in the background, the person who makes the connections. That's what Fifth Business means. It's a theatrical term. It means the member of the company who is not the lead, not even the lead's best friend, but the agent whose actions the plot turns upon. So the classic example is Friar Lawrence in Romeo and Juliet. The first crime in Fifth Business is just a boyhood prank. It's an episode of meanness that has a disproportionate effect. Two boys are having a snowball fight. One of them is Dunstable Ramsay, who's the narrator of Fifth Business, and the other is his best frenemy, Percy Boyd Stanton, who is the rich boy in town. Percy throws a snowball that has a rock in it at Dunstable, but Dunstable ducks and the snowball hits Mary Dempster, who is the pregnant wife of a local clergyman. And the shock of that impact sends her into premature labor. And it pushes her from what was sort of a gentle eccentricity to severe mental illness. And Dunstable feels horribly guilty about this, but Percy will never acknowledge his responsibility. And then Mary Dempster's life becomes even worse, even more tragic, when her son Paul disappears as a child, apparently having run off to the circus. Dunstable, our narrator, he grows up, he goes to war, which is the First World War. He loses a leg. He rechristens himself Dunstan after a saint who reprimands the devil. Percy doesn't go to war. He drops his first name. He becomes Boy Stanton, and he makes a fortune in his family business. But the two men remain in this uneasy closeness, which I think a lot of us can identify with, that friend from your youth who's just permanently connected to you, even if you wouldn't choose them as a friend now. And then one day, Ramsay, who's always been interested in stage magic, he sees a performance by the world-famous illusionist, Magnus Isengrim, who turns out to be Paul Dempster. Grown up, very much changed. The reunion with Paul Dempster transforms Ramsay's life, and it introduces him to a strange and brilliant woman, Liesel, who is disfigured by acromegaly. And she's Isengrim's business partner. Eventually, Ramsay, who's still thinking about Mary Dempster and about Boy Stanton being guilty of this childhood crime, he arranges for Boy Stanton to see an Isengrim performance. And he takes him backstage where Isengrim introduces himself as the son of Mary Dempster. And Stanton claims to have no memory of the night that Paul was born, but that night he dies in a single car accident, and they find a stone in his mouth, which may be the stone from the old snowball, which Dunstan Ramsay kept all those years. So the question is, who killed Boy Stanton? Ramsay knows that he didn't, or at least that's what he tells us. And Fifth Business ends with Ramsay going to another Isengrim performance, where during a fortune-telling illusion called the Brazen Head of Friar Bacon, someone yells from the balcony, "Who killed Boy Stanton?" And the Brazen Head, who is Isengrim's partner, Liesel, says he was killed by the usual cabal, by himself, first of all, by the woman that he knew, by the woman that he did not know, by the man who granted his inmost wish, and by the inevitable fifth, who was keeper of his conscience and keeper of the stone. And in the second book, The Manticore, we learn who was the person yelling. And in the third book, World of Wonders, we finally get an explanation of that message. But Fifth Business and its sequels showed me a way to navigate the big world and figure out my own story and figure out what my roles might be. It showed me that asking the questions can be more important than whatever the literal solution might be. These three books are deeply rooted in Jungian theory, but it's all very well disguised. I mean, you don't need to have any familiarity with Jung to read these books, although if you do, it's kind of fun to find the Easter eggs. If I were teaching these books in a course, I would pair them with Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, because the same themes, the same archetypes recur. And all of human nature shows up in the Deptford trilogy. But Davies, as an author, he doesn't make any judgments. He loves all his characters. The only thing that he really judges are unkindness and the unwillingness to admit who we are. These were stories that I really needed in my 20s, but I go back to these books every few years and I find something new in them every time.
Wow, that's amazing. I've never heard of being prescribed a book. I wish I had had your therapist and or read these books at that time in my life. That sounds
Not too late.
I'm going to do it now. And I had not heard of them, so I am going to dive in and learn all about this. Very fascinating. It was the psychology of junkie back then too. Very cool. Thank you so much. I feel like I've learned a lot tonight already. Thank you for being here, Claire. You're always wonderful. Our next guest is also wonderful. It is Tara Laskowski. Tara is I just saw someone in my town reading your newest book. I had to tell you at the coffee shop. Tara is the author of the suspense novels The Weekend Retreat, The Mother Next Door, and One Night Gone, which won the Agatha Award, the Cavity Award, and the Anthony Award. She has won the Agatha Award and Thriller Award for her short fiction, and was the longtime editor of the online flash fiction journal Smoke Long Quarterly, who lives in Virginia with her husband, crime writer Art Taylor, and their son, Dashiell. Welcome, Tara.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, guys. So whenever anybody asks me about, books that have influenced me or that, have had an impact on me, I immediately go to like my childhood. And that was like a time when I was reading for the sake of reading. Like now I have that like writer eye, so like I don't always enjoy it quite as much as I did back then. And when I was in kind of middle school age, I was reading a lot of series. So I picked a series for tonight. I picked the Three Investigators series, which I think I've read every book in the series multiple times, and I collected all of them. So the Three Investigators are Bob Andrews, Pete Crenshaw, and Jupiter Jones. And they are about, I think, middle school age. They're not old enough to drive. They don't have their license, but they are old enough to kind of go on their own and explore and solve mysteries. So they're the perfect age. And they live in Rocky Beach, California, which is near Hollywood and LA. And so a lot of the mysteries that they get involved in deal with the movie industry or kind of quirky characters and actors and actresses in that sort of Hollywood era. And they always touch on the supernatural. So if you're Scooby-Doo fans, you kind of get this. It's like there's always some monster or ghost that they think is the cause behind whatever the mystery is. And so these three boys are, when they're solving the mystery, they kind of find the real aspect behind whatever the supernatural thing appeared to be. And so there's two things about the series that really have stood out to me. I've read them again as an adult. We're reading them out loud to our son Dash right now, and he loves them too. The first is the headquarters that the boys have their detective agency in. So Jupiter's uncle is a junkyard owner. And so he has all this crazy stuff in his junkyard. And there's a trailer in the junkyard that's been covered over by junk over the years. And so the boys have taken over this trailer. And this is their headquarters. And so they have all these like secret passages and tunnels and like ways to get inside it. They have a phone in there, they have all kinds of equipment. And as a kid, I was like so fascinated by this because it's this glamorous, crazy, elaborate fort. And like, who doesn't love forts when they're kids? So it was such a vivid image for me. And I always loved that. And the other thing I loved about the books, especially the earlier ones in the series, is that they were introduced by Alfred Hitchcock as a character. So he was like, he introduced every case, every book for the reader. And then at the end, the boys would go back to him and talk to him about the case and kind of summarize it. And he would ask all the questions that would tie up all the loose ends that the readers wanted to know. And so I always thought that was really cool that, Alfred Hitchcock was a character. He did not become a character towards the end. I don't know if that was some like weird copyright issue or what, but it was really fun to like see him as one of the characters. And so I just, these books have like really stood out to me as great settings, great characters. In my books, setting is really popular. And so like, I always come to the setting first in my books. And so these just were so vivid image wise that like I think they've stuck with me because of that. And I think that they really stand the test of time. So even if you've never read them as an adult, I think you can come to them and just like get lost in the fun of them. They are out of print right now, so they're a little bit harder to find. You can find them in used bookstores. I look every time I go to a used bookstore, I look for them, even though I have all of them. Or you can find them online sometimes. And I have heard a rumor, because I may or may not be the member of a Facebook group about the Three Investigators series. So I've heard a rumor that they may be coming back into print, but I don't know when that would be. So, but anyway, I love them. So I hope that maybe someone else discovers them.
Thanks so much, Tara. I too am a fan of the Three Investigators. I don't have all of them, but I have some of them, so I'm excited to hear that maybe they'll be reprinted. And I'm so excited to hear that you're reading them aloud to your son. I think that's so great. So thanks so much for bringing that. Totally different than what the other books we've been discussing, but equally a wonderful choice. So thank you so much. Our next guest is KT Nguyen. KT is a former magazine editor. Her features have appeared in Glamour, Shape, and Fitness. After graduating from Brown University, she spent her 20s and 30s bouncing from New York City to San Francisco, Shanghai, Beijing, and Taipei, and is now settled just outside of Washington, D.C. with her family. KT enjoys native plant gardening, playing with her rescue terrier Alice, and rooting for the Mets. You Know What You Did will be released by Dutton in April of this year and is her debut novel, and I can tell you already that I loved it. So welcome tonight, KT.
Thank you so much for having me here, Shawn and Kristopher. I'm so excited to be here. And the book I'm going to talk about today is The Rising of the Moon by Gladys Mitchell. And it's the 18th book in Gladys Mitchell's Mrs. Bradley mystery series. You might know it from the BBC television program starring Diana Rigg, but I actually discovered that after. I first read the book, I want to say 25 years ago, and fell in love with the main character, Adela Lestrange Bradley, Beatrice Adela Lestrange Bradley. And so before I dive into the actual book, I wanted to talk a little bit about the series just to set it up. It's the 18th book. The first book came out in 1929 and it was called Speedy Death. The last one was about 1983 when the author died. So it spanned most of the 20th century, this series. Mrs. Bradley, the main character, of course, never aged, but those around her did, which is interesting. The author, Gladys Mitchell, wrote one book every single year. There are 66 Mrs. Bradley mysteries, except for the year 1931. And I didn't have a chance to look what happened in 1931, but she skipped that year. And I don't know if you've heard of Gladys Mitchell, but she was a member of the original Detection Club, along with John Dixon Carr and G.K. Chesterton and Anthony Berkeley. And so during the golden age of detective fiction, Gladys Mitchell was actually considered one of the big three women detective writers, along with Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie. But now she isn't very well known at all. She fell into relative obscurity. So I'd want to know why. And before we get to that question, I'll actually talk a little bit about the book, which came out in 1945. The Rising of the Moon, I guess you could describe it as an eerie novel about a series of Jack the Ripper style serial killings that take place in a small English village. And the narrator is a 13-year-old boy. The setting is the village is Thames at Brentford, which is an actual small village where Gladys Mitchell, the author, grew up and spent time teaching in a girls' boarding school. It's the quintessential quiet, small English town with alleys and towpaths and public houses and canal bridges. And the geography is really an important almost character in the story. Gladys Mitchell worked with maps and she was very meticulous in describing the geography of the terrain. It really comes to life. The tone of the novel has been described as slightly gothic with a Hansel and Gretel quality. It's dark, it's kind of eerie, it's odd. And in terms of plot, as I said, there are Ripper-style killings, bloody corsets are found, dairy maids are murdered, there's a creepy antique store, and a circus comes to town. So there's a lot of kind of quirky, dark details, but plot isn't a big part of what Gladys Mitchell focuses on in her Mrs. Bradley writings. It's really, Mrs. Bradley is one of the first psychological sleuths dating back to 1929. So Gladys Mitchell once described murder as the applied mathematics of psychology. And I think that's an interesting interpretation in how she treats her stories, because we don't learn about we don't solve the case or learn about the case through inquests and medical reports and cross-examinations. I think Gladys Mitchell considered those kind of boring. Instead, it's really a psychological suspense story where we learn about character motivations through their conversations, and we understand the characters through their relationships with each other. And so to me, this is unlike any of the other Mrs. Bradley stories. It's really a coming of age novel. And it's one of Mitchell's only stories told in first person. And as I said, it's narrated by a 13-year-old boy. And the interesting thing is, well, the boy in the story is really absorbed in the murder investigation, and he's got a huge crush on his family has a beautiful lodger named Christina. So it's about his coming to terms with his sexuality and his emotions. And the interesting thing is Gladys Mitchell said that the character of Simon Innes, the 13-year-old boy, is based on her and her own experiences growing up. She said that in her family, the household didn't really make a lot of practical distinctions between boys and girls at the time. And she identified with the 13-year-old boy in this story. And there's a younger brother that's actually based on her own younger brother. And I found that interesting because the psychologist detective, Dame Beatrice Adela Lestrange Bradley, is a consulting psychoanalyst for the Home Office. And she was pretty progressive for her time, the character. She advocated for birth control in the 1930s. There were all kinds of topics discussed in the book that were kind of pushed the boundaries of the genre, which I really, really enjoyed reading and was kind of delighted to discover. She touches on a wide range of subjects in an unusual way. It's not sensational in the sense of the real criminality in her stories aren't the people who go beyond the boundaries of society. It's the people who try too hard to repress their sexuality or try to contain their natural, who don't express themselves in their natural beings. Those are the people who end up being the murderers in her stories, which I found interesting for the time, the 20s and 30s. And before I go, one thing I really like about Mrs. Bradley is that she isn't one of those elderly, demure detectives. And she's pretty unconventional. She's not a young, pretty female detective. She's not Nancy Drew. I have to read some descriptions. She's described as a deadly serpent basking in the sun, an alligator smiling. In later years, she is referred to as Mrs. Crocodile. She's described as dry without being shriveled and bird-like without being pretty. She reminds others of a reconstruction of a pterodactyl seen in a German museum. She possessed nasty, dry, claw-like hands, and her arms, yellow and curiously repulsive, suggested the plucked wings of a fowl. So this is in the golden age. She was who she wanted to be. She was endlessly wealthy, a polymath, a genius. She was an expert dead shot with a gun, a knife thrower, and an excellent pool player. And the author herself, Gladys Mitchell, was an excellent pool player, a dead shot with a gun, and a knife thrower, which is fun. I could talk forever about her, but I won't. Basically, I really love these books because they focus on tone, setting, and character above plot. There's no formula in her books, no gotcha moments, no big focus on the twist. It's really about humor, prose, and characterization. And I love how she uses genre to kind of push the boundaries of what is being discussed in society at the time. And if you really, really want to know more, there's a great tribute site to her at gladysmitchell.com with lots of great information. But I think going back to my question of why she fell into relative obscurity, I think it's because she pushed the boundaries of the genre and she didn't try to do anything formulaic. I think sometimes people want that, but she wanted to go elsewhere. And I find her work really interesting.
Well, I'm going to go find that website and educate myself because was unaware. So thank you so much for bringing that to us. That's amazing. You speak with it with such passion. So that makes me want to go find more. So thank you so much for bringing that to us tonight. And it's just great to hear you talk about it, honestly. All right, our final guest this evening is someone I know real well, and her name is Deb Well. Deb Well has been an expert in marketing and digital strategy for a few decades, turning that expertise to the publishing arena in recent years. She has served as a marketing consultant with Level Best Books for over 2 years now. You may have seen her at various mystery conferences with her partner of nearly 30 years, author Gabriel Valjean, who was also a guest on our show. They both live in Boston with their tuxedo cat Munchkin, who is a bit of a social media star among the mystery community. Welcome, Deb.
Thanks, Shawn. And thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I am a great lover reader of mysteries now, but when I was growing up, I actually wasn't exposed to mysteries. I was definitely a sci-fi fantasy girl. That's what my dad handed down to me. And came very late late in terms of being 13 to the genre, thanks to Jim Hutton and Ellery Queen on TV. It's like I developed a bit of a crush and then had to go out and read the books. So those were the first mystery series that I ever read. And I love series. I mean, because if I've got characters that I like, I want to keep spending time with them. So I would say if you looked at my Kindle library, which is huge, it would be, 98% series of whichever genre, but it's just, I love series. So when thinking about, what would be my favorite series, the things that draw me to a series that make me happy as a reader are books where there's characters that are interesting, little quirky, that I care about, and who there's a little bit of humor. It's not humorous books, but there's a little bit of humor in there. But the books can also make me cry. And the book I picked is the first book in the Hollow series, Kim Harrison's Dead Witch Walking. The series has definitely made me laugh and cry / sob over the years in terms of the books. It's about, at its core, a friendship, three people. It's like Rachel Morgan is our main protagonist. She's a witch bounty hunter, and her two best friends, Ivy, who's a living vampire, long story, versus dead vampire, and Jenks, who's a pixie. They have a agency together, and they do bounty hunting. They do it's some private eye stuff. We have a world where paranormal creatures always existed, but the problem was a few years back, a lot of the human race died off because of genetically modified tomatoes, which killed them. This is why humans are afraid of pizza. It's a great sub storyline. And so when so many humans died, it's like the paranormal folk couldn't stay hidden anymore. It kind of became impossible. And so they kind of came out of the closet, as it were. And so we have vampires and werewolves and witches and, as I said, pixies and fairies and elves and demons and all of these things with the humans, coexisting with humans. And Rachel works in conjunction with the Interland Security, which is, I'll call it the paranormal police, as opposed to the humans who have their own police force. And I love police procedurals and stuff in general. And so I always feel that the tension between the human police and Interland Security is a lot like your local police and the FBI, because the one thinks they're so much better and comes in and tries to take over investigations and stuff. So there's that aspect to it. But the thing that really just keeps me coming back every time is just it's the characters, it's the relationships, it's caring so much about what happens to them. The plots are great, but it's incidental to those relationships and those people that she creates. And she ended the series about almost a decade ago, which just crushed me. And then she did a couple of prequels where we got to see how the whole tomato thing came about. And then thank God she resurrected the series. And we picked up where she left off, because I definitely felt like the story wasn't over as far as I was concerned. And she's been knocking it out of the park since. So she's gotten to write some other things. I mean, I know why writers sometimes want to go away from a series, because, they don't want to get pigeonholed and they want to do some other stuff. But this, it's so great. It's so wonderful. So I like the way she world builds with the paranormal stuff, because I've read kabillions of vampire books, and I'm always interested if somebody can take the basic tropes and twist it in some way I hadn't thought about, something different, which she definitely does. And with the vampires who kind of rule, I first say it's set in Cincinnati. That's our main hometown. Over the series, we get to other places, but Cincinnati and the vampires ruling it are the main focus. And you get to know the different rules that go around the different, as it were, tribes. But it's all about Rachel, Ivy, and Jenks, and how much they care about each other. And Rachel's a bit of a misfit. She doesn't really fit in. And I definitely identified with that as well. So basically, highly, highly recommended.
Thanks so much, Deb. I came to Kim Harrison by way of Laurel K. Hamilton, who also does paranormal mysteries. Her series sort of went off the tracks with a little bit too much sex later in the series. But Kim Harrison, I think she really does play fair with the readers, even though there's paranormal. The mysteries in them are pretty solid mysteries. So I do also recommend it. So thanks so much for bringing that to us.
Great.
We like to end our series, since we've been looking at books from the past, with a book from the future. So Shawn and I pick a book that we're looking forward to that's coming up soon. My choice this month is Rob Osler's Cirque du Soleil. It's the second in his Hayden and Friends series. Rob calls them quosies, which basically is queer-focused cozy mysteries. This time, Hayden and his friend Hollister are investigating a death that involves a circus troupe similar to Cirque du Soleil. And they get into all kinds of a mess. So it's hilarious, funny. It has a real strong heart, as did the first one, Devil's Chew Toy, which was nominated for countless awards. So if you haven't checked out that series, please check out Rob Osler's Hayden and Friends series. Shawn, what'd you bring?
I didn't tell you beforehand, so this is the first time. It'll be a surprise for you. I'm looking forward to Tana French's next book, The Hunter. Comes out March 4th, I think, so pretty soon. She's just sort of one of those writers where I just like drop everything. But when the books, her new books, there's certain people, they're just landmark people for me that I really look forward to their novels. This one, just real quick, it says, it's a blazing summer when two men arrive in a small village in the west of Ireland. One of them is coming home. Both of them are coming to get rich. One of them is coming to die. So I'll be finding out what that whole thing is about, hopefully very soon.
I believe that's a sequel to her previous one, and I think it's a sort of a Western, her take on the Western, even though it's not a Western, it's set in Ireland. But so that's a very great choice. So thanks so much for that. I hope everyone has enjoyed our episode this time. Please join us again for the final two in our year-long series of We Are What We Read. And until then, read often and read widely.